name's Helena Price. I write the novels Haven about a shapeshifter on the run from her clan and her responsibilities who gets turned into a vampire and sucked into the underworld of a city called Haven. I also write the Alex Craft novels, the first of which just came out, Grave Witch, about a woman who can speak to the dead. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'll speak up a little. The sections I'm going to read for you today are from my most recent book, Grave Witch. And the first section I'm going to read takes place with the main character, Alex Craft. She's the witch. She will be doing a ritual to raise some murder victims at the morgue. So, I'll read that for you. The obsidian ring on my right hand throbbed with the raw energy I'd stored. I mentally tapped into it, drawing out a spindly string of magic. There wasn't much. I hadn't had time to recharge the ring after the ritual for Henry Baker, but there was enough. I channeled the energy into the wax circle and it sprang to life, buzzing with pale blue power behind my eyelids. Now for the fun part. Releasing my connection to the magic stored in the obsidian ring, I unclasped the thin silver charm bracelet on my wrist and shoved it in my pocket. The extra defenses the charms gave me vanished. The chill of the grave pressed against my mental shields like icy water lapping at the edge of my consciousness. I drew in a deep breath and sank deeper into a trance. The grave essence lifting from the corpses within my circle persisted, thundering against my mind, beckoning, taunting, demanding. I dropped my shields. A racking wind rushed through me. The clammy touch of the grave slid against my skin, beneath my flesh. I opened my eyes. My vision had narrowed, leaving the world covered in a patina of gray. Flakes of rust covered the stainless steel gurneys on each side of me. The threadbare and tattered linen sheet covering the body on the gurney to my left rippled in the breeze blowing through me. The linoleum floor under my boots had worn away, and the cement beneath it crumbled. Outside the circle, John's wrinkled jacket was pocked with holes, but he was filled with light, his soul a dazzling shimmer of pale yellow. I looked away. The wind picked up, filling my ears with its roar and blocking out any other sound. The chill buffeted me, clawing under my skin, into my blood. It hurt. I was alive. A being of warmth and breath, not of cold and stillness, not of death. My life force burned against the chill, warring against the grave essence wriggling in the center of my being. Sweat beaded on my skin even as I shivered. I needed reprieve. The soulless husk in the body bag called to me. I didn't need to guide the power. I stopped fighting it, and my living heat spilled into the waiting corpse. As my heat fled, the chill of the grave sank comfortably into my limbs. The roar of the wind stilled. I blinked. I could feel only one body within the circle, the female in the black bag. Strange. I mentally reached for her, my innate magic following the trail my heat had burned. Even filled with my life force, the shade my mind touched was weak, tattered. How could a shade who's never been raised fade so quickly? My magic trailed along the large cuts in the feeble shade. The deep, gaping incisions nearly shredded her to pieces. I'd never felt anything like it. I poured magic into the corpse, letting my power fill the holes in the broken shade. She still felt frail, barely remembered, but held together with both my heat and power, she was substantial enough to raise. Taking a deep breath, I gave the shade a gentle push. My power coaxed her from the body, guided her across the chasm separating the living from the dead. She emerged screaming. So that's just my character casting a ritual, which screaming is bad. That typically doesn't happen. Again, the main character is Alex Craft. The entire book is in her perspective. She has, at this point, had quite a nasty day or two, which you'll hear about, and she's being haunted by a ghost that's been following her around and basically annoying her. He hasn't done much yet besides appear and then disappear as soon as she tries to talk to him or figure out why he's following her around. So that's what happens shortly before this scenes. Oh yes, and there's a video that's been released with her as the unfortunate star of it. So, you stupid web page. I typed another command, but it was no good. I couldn't hit the back door into the site. Disgusted, I tabbed over to a new page. I'd been attempting to find the original version of the leaked video for almost 2 hours, but the file had spread like a virus over the internet. News stations, blogs, boards, torrents. It was everywhere. My phone buzzed beside my laptop and I glanced at the display. The name wasn't familiar. I hit the button to send it straight to voicemail, which was probably full by now. Every reporter in the nation had apparently found my number. I was surprised I hadn't heard from Casey yet. With any luck, it would be a couple more hours before she saw the video. I wanted more information before I talked to her. PC, who'd been asleep in my lap, lifted his white-crested head and looked at me, clearly annoyed with my outburst. He stood and circled, but apparently couldn't get comfortable. His back legs bent as he prepared to launch himself from my lap. "Oh, no, you don't," I said, almost absently, as I grabbed him and gently set him down on the floor. His nails clicked and his calves thumped on the hard wood as he moseyed over to check his bowl. His empty bowl. He'd already eaten all the chips I'd snagged from Max. "Dinner later," I told him, then turned back to the computer. A chilled wind danced over my exposed shoulders. That damn ghost. I'd had about enough of his haunting gig. I flipped around. The ghost stood directly behind me, leaning forward as if he'd been reading my computer screen. My knee brushed his leg as my chair spun and he jerked back, his eyes flying wide. I expected him to disappear, to hide deep in the land of the dead as he had a half-dozen times in the past 24 hours. Right now I was irritated enough to follow him across the chasm. But he didn't fade. His gaze flicked from where my knees had brushed him, up to my face. Then his lips shot into motion. I shook my head. "Oh, so he's finally ready to talk?" His hand shot out and grave cold fingers wrapped around the bones of my wrist. I yelped, leaping off the bar stool. It stayed and crashed forward through the ghost, slamming into my calf as it clattered to the floor. The ghost's grip never wavered. He stepped sideways, out of the rungs of the stool. His mouth never stopped moving, not that I could hear him. "Get your hands off me before I exercise your ghostly ass." Okay, so I lacked the magic to back up that threat, but he didn't know that. Or maybe he did. His grip tightened, his fingers pressing into my flesh. His lips moved in slow, exaggerated words, and he pointed at me with his free hand. Right. He wanted me to do something. Well, I wanted him to let go. I concentrated on my mental shields, focusing on the wall of living vines that enclosed my psyche and separated me from the land of the dead. There were always gaps between the vines, small holes that let me gaze across the chasm and interact with ghosts and soul collectors. Sealing my shields completely was exhausting, rather like closing my eyes and sticking my fingers in my ears. But it wasn't impossible. I visualized the vines slithering tight around each other. In my mind's eye, dagger-like thorns sprouted from the green tendrils, the red-tipped barbs a clear warning. The ghost fingers slipped through my wrist, leaving brave chill clinging to my bones. His shimmering form faded to translucent. He frowned, staring at his hand. He reached out again, and again his hand passed through my arm. I smiled. Judging by the way the ghost backed up, it wasn't my most welcoming smile. He held up his hands, palms forward, and mouthed something, which could have been anything from "I'm sorry" to "please help me." One day I had to learn to read lips, but not today. I crossed my arms over my chest and took a step back. Let's establish some ground rules. First of all, I'm not in the business of helping wandering souls exact final revenge or pass messages from beyond the grave to loved ones. Got it? His frown deepened, but he nodded. Good. Now, I'm guessing you started following me at the morgue. Do you know something about one of the bodies? His lips parted and he nodded vigorously enough that he had to push his shimmering glasses back up his nose. Okay. I was starting to get somewhere. Which body? His mouth fell into motion, his arms emphasizing what was obviously a lively explanation. I held up a hand to stop the silent rant, and the ghost slumped his shoulders, an inaudible sigh disturbing his shaggy hair. Right. Yes or no questions, Alex. Duh. I cleared my throat. Do you know something about Governor Coleman's death? The ghost cocked his head to the side, as if considering my question. Then he nodded, one slow rise and fall of his head. Well, that wasn't the most reassuring or enthusiastic response, but it was better than nothing. A drop of sweat dripped from my hairline, the moisture carving a line down to my chin. I couldn't keep my shields locked this tight for long. I nodded to the corner of the room and motioned for the ghost to follow as I made my way to the circle etched in the floor. Residual power buzzed at the edge of the circle, despite the fact the barrier was currently dormant. In you go, I said, pointing at the ghost. He scowled at the etched line and shoved his balled fist into the front pockets of his baggy jeans. Hey, you want to talk to me, you go in the circle. That, or you find some other grave witch to haunt. I seriously hoped he didn't take me up on the latter, if he honestly knew anything about Coleman. But he'd already learned I was tangible to him, and if I dropped my shields enough to hear him, we'd be very real to each other. I wasn't risking that if he wasn't trapped. His inaudible huff made his shoulders slump further, but he trudged into the circle. I channeled magic from my ring into the barrier before he could change his mind. As the translucent blue wall materialized between us, I smiled and eased back on my shields. My mental vines uncoiled, and I coaxed them into opening more gaps than normal, enough so that while I wasn't straddling the chasm between the living and the dead the way I was when I raised shades, my psyche was still reaching pretty far across it. I blinked as my gravesite turned on, and the decaying world of the dead superimposed itself over my apartment. The purgatory world's crumbling plaster and weak gray light juxtaposed themselves over my solid beige walls, both real and not. I focused on the ghost. His hair was a deep chestnut brown, and the frames of his glasses were the thick black plastic that tended to emerge and fade from fashion among sophisticates and emo kids alike. The flannel shirt he wore was almost as drab and colorless now as it had been when I was looking with my shields in place, but the baggy jeans were deep blue. What's your name? I asked. The ghost frowned at me, and at first I thought he wasn't going to answer, which would have been ironic considering how he'd been yelling while I couldn't hear him. But he finally shrugged and said, Roy Pearson. I nodded acknowledgement, but it wasn't a name I'd ever heard mentioned at the station. Not that there was any reason for me to know about most of the corpses that passed through the morgue. Ghosts were more adaptable than shades, their appearance often reverting to their perception of themselves as opposed to the actual state in which they died. But if Roy was truly a male in his early 30s in decent health, well, decent if he weren't dead, he probably wound up in the morgue by foul play. It would have been polite to ask about him and how he died, but he'd been haunting me. I'd been shot at, and I had a swarm of reporters buzzing around. I wasn't feeling polite. So Roy, what do you know about Coleman's body? I'm guessing it's stock, right? Something glamored or otherwise spelled to look like Coleman? Coleman. His lips curled back as though he could barely stand the feel of the name passing over his tongue. Everyone keeps going on about Governor Coleman. He looked at me, his eyes bright behind the glasses. You bring justice to the dead, right? Like you did for that little girl? I frowned. Little girl had to refer to Amanda Holliday. I'd already told Roy I didn't get involved in avenging the dead. For one thing, ghosts were sentient, so they had agendas and could lie. For another, they didn't have a currency. Listen, I'd like to help you, but... He cut me off. That body everyone's so worked up about? It's real, all right. It just doesn't belong to Coleman. It's mine. Like I said, that's from this book, Grave Witch. My most recent release. It's the first book in the Alex Kraft novels. The second book, Grave Dance, comes out July 5th, so I hope you guys will check it out. I think we're about out of time. Yeah, we're about out of time, so thank you, everyone.